sorry, while you're on that point, something that I've noticed is that, so I in order for me to pay my rent, I have to go and buy US and then, pay my rent, etc., etc. But it's taken me a considerable amount of time this time around to try and get that US. And it's when the guy who I usually work with is saying no one wants to let go of their US because they are seeing no value in doing so. Is this what you're speaking about right now?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that our economy is a unique economy. I think it's on record as being the most informal economy in the world after Bolivia. We are number 2 of all countries in the world. We're the most informal country in the world, coming only after Bolivia, which means almost everything is done outside the main systems. You're talking of rent, you're talking of the other guy that you need to call, you're talking, nothing is done in the formal channel. Okay, nothing is an overstatement, but so much is done outside the confines of the formal system in Zimbabwe. And the IMF has noted that. That's why I say yes, but I also say no, in the sense that, well, something had to be done, Kuda. The things, maybe we are forgetting the situation where we had gone to, particularly when in fact, when we had get to a point where the auction, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange had to be shut and the mobile money transfer agencies had to be curtailed in their businesses, the situation had really gone haywire. Something had to be done. It might not be to everyone's taste, but trust me, it averted a disaster that was in the making when those drastic measures were taken to shut down the stock exchange, as well as to curtail the process or the transaction of the mobile money transfer agencies. And this is one of the some things that was done, the introduction of the auction system.
So it's interesting you bring up the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, because that's actually the second half of our conversation. I think I hear you on the answer that you gave me. And I think a lot of Zimbabweans would say, but why do we even need to get to a point where we are doing these things? Like, why do we have to save a train from crashing when we can just drive the train responsibly? Why do we always have to come up to this point where we need to now save ourselves from the brink of despair and etc.? It just seems highly unnecessary. But you bring up the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. So obviously a couple months ago, the stock exchange was shut down. And you're saying that this was a necessary measure to stop an impending disaster. Can you please enlighten some of us who anecdotally looked at that and just said, well, there you go again, this government. What happened? Why did that need to happen? What was going on? Can you provide some context for us to understand and appreciate that whole Zimbabwe Stock Exchange thing? And before you answer, I encourage everyone to read the article that I put in on the page before this post that Admire wrote, which irons it out properly. But for those who didn't read it, Admire, please explain for us.
Okay. I'll briefly explain what a stock exchange is. Maybe I'll start there. A stock exchange is a market where, I'll use the word entities, because these are companies and things that beyond. They go and sell their equity or parts of their equity, being like ownership of those, to raise capital to conduct normal business. I don't know if that's too much jargon. I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can. It's a market where business sell portions of ownership of their own businesses. So they sell maybe 10% or 5% in small portions, which we call shares. And then when they sell those small portions, which is equity, they sell it through the stock exchange. The stock exchange becomes the platform, becomes the market within which you and I can individually walk there and buy a small portion of ownership of OK, of Delta, to name just 2 companies in Zimbabwe. Yeah? Now, that being one of the main purposes, it also became a de facto store of value. For you, Kuda, who was speaking of keeping your money in the pillow, you can take your money to the stock exchange, buy shares for any one of those companies listed on there. I think in Zimbabwe they were listed, is it 72 or 76 companies listed on the stock exchange. You buy a portion. Now, because the stock exchange reflects equity, the capital of the company which is selling portions, it means it moves with the rate. If a company, for instance, Econet Wireless Zimbabwe, if for argument's sake it's valued at $10 US, this is just picking a figure so that we calculate. Let's say it's valued at $10 US, regardless of what's happening with the rate outside, its value will be more or less $10 US according to its productivity, which means if the exchange rate is falling excessively, the stock exchange will maintain more or less that value. But the Zimbabwean Stock Exchange became unique. I think up to the time it was shut, it was the best performing stock exchange in the world. Best performing in terms of the returns it gave you. The returns, if you bought stocks on whichever company, or the majority of them, their value was increasing even beyond the core value, the $10 US I was telling you about, which means it became like an investment platform. And now if you take that part where I think the interest rate, it grew up to a percentage of 776% from January to June. Imagine 700% increase in the value of the investment. It then brought in speculators, what the authorities would like to call nefarious activities. It brought in then speculators, people who are rent-seeking, people who are like Kuda, who don't want to use the pillow. You know, it then went beyond.
I see you're really excited with my pillow. It's just.
That's right. Because you keep on referring to putting your US dollars in your pillow. Now, this made it more of like a gambling, like a casino. The intention of buying and selling of portions of company went out through the window. It became something else altogether, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange at that point. Because now people were not only rent-seeking, but also self-aggrandizing, should I put it that way, where they would buy shares and speculate on the figures fluctuating violently up and down, and then wait when it's at the peak point, they sell those shares very fast. And because the money felt like you just picked it up, Kuda. You picked it up from the floor. It wasn't productive, wasn't painful. It was like easy money for whoever was investing in it, which means they were willing and able to buy at whatever rate they was obtaining for the US dollar. By that, I'm saying they would buy shares, speculate, sell at the highest peak point. When they sell, that money obviously comes as RTGS into their bank accounts for the shares they've bought. They've bought for shares worth $10 US, I'll repeat. And now they are valued at whatever, $1,000 US or whatever, back into the bank account. Now, that's an exponentially high amount. And whoever has sold their shares that way, they don't mind much whatever the rate is of recouping their US dollars, because whatever the rate was, they were definitely going to sell this RTGS and make money still. It was still a profit to them. Even if it's valued at 1,000, and then someone says, no, I'll give you this much rate, you only get 500. It's still way more than the 10 that they invested initially. Now, what that meant was, on the market, the informal market, the exchange rate on the parallel became, you know how it became haywire, because everyone was now selling their shares at those high prices, and whatever rate was obtaining on the market, they would still make a profit, which was neither here nor there for them. At least it's a profit as far as they're concerned. That blew up our inflation. At some point, I think at that point it was close, hovering at 770 official. And on the parallel market, they were even saying close to 1,000, the inflation rate at the time. The authorities had to take drastic action. What they had to do was to shut the source of this money. And shutting of the stock exchange, it's quite a drastic thing. It's so rare, it happens maybe in war times only. And in Zimbabwe, it was only shut once more before. But this time, they had to take that drastic action and shut it. Along with the stock exchange, they also had to curtail the operations of the mobile money transfer agencies, because those were oiling the transactions. The stock market was the source. and the mobile money transfers was oiling. Then it was then how the money was moved about, and people would end up with cheap money, so to speak. But those were just the few, select few. It's not everyone who's involved in the stock market in Zimbabwe. The figures are quite low, but then they were holding the whole nation at ransom. At the end of the day, you and I are affected. I'm walking to the pump and the fuel price there is changing daily because of someone, few, 3, 4, 5 people who are holding the whole nation at ransom. And I'm sure those are the few people who come out more vocal against the RBZ auction system that we were talking about earlier, because they got to lose easy money they were making. And these are powerful people. These are people who have access to huge amounts of money, who invest a lot in the stock exchange. They will definitely come, and their voice is powerful. And they will come and give you all sorts, Kuda, to convince you that the RBZ erred in introducing these, or the finance ministry erred in curtailing that. But at the end of the day, for you and I, it has brought stability, the much needed stability that we needed for us then to grow from here, to remove all those obstacles that we're now facing because of the ever-changing exchange rate.
I think I'm gonna combine two comments that I see here to respond to what you're saying. It's not really responding with the question, but Kudzai Mutuga says here, the question is, who is buying those shares? As long as there's no accountability, there can never be a solution. And I think when Frederick Gibson comes in and then also says, I long for the day when our politicians and business leaders speak with honesty and integrity. You know, what you're saying is so helpful, because it helps to explain it as clear as day. And I'm really grateful that I know how difficult it is sometimes to explain these things as easy as you are. So kudos to you for that. But it's heartbreaking to hear it, because, you know, it means that our entire lives can be held at ransom, like you're saying, by
a few individuals.
And Frederick says, is it speculation or insider trading? I know you may not, you definitely won't have a direct answer for that, but was it speculation, or did it look more like insider trading? You know.
In the absence of evidence, it's difficult to put a finger to say this is exactly what I was obtaining on the ground. But it could be both. For those who don't understand, insider trading is where someone buys shares with an understanding of inside information. And it's actually an illegal activity. You can go to prison for indulging in insider trading. Like, for instance, I'm trying to explain as much as I can as if I'm explaining to people who are not economic or in finance, because I'm sure you've got engineers as well as for your audience. If a company has information that's going to increase its value, as I was speaking about that value thing. For instance, you're in mining and your company finds another claim which has more gold than previously thought of. That information necessarily increases the value of that company, because if we were sitting on gold deposits worth X amount of money, tomorrow after finding that new loot, we're now valued at Y amount of money. Someone who has that information can then go on the stock market and buy more shares today before the information is made public to everyone. And by the time that information is made public, it's made public by what are called cautionary statements. They bring this to the stock exchange and they explain to the public that we were valued X yesterday, but today we were valued Y because we've increased our deposit that we found. And all of a sudden that value is high, the shares shoot up. Whoever bought the shares with that knowledge, it's called insider trading. And it's illegal because it's not playing fair with everyone. So this could have been possible here, as well as also plain criminal activity besides inside. Whatever, it all precipitates down to one thing. The stock exchange became one of the social evils. If you look at that article that you are referring to, that I wrote, I spoke about shutting down of the stock exchange as a necessary evil. It's an evil in that it curtails companies, particularly those who were playing on the narrow, who were playing on the straight and narrow, who are not doing these illegal activities, but it was for the greater good. Because at that point, things had gone to a situation where almost of no return. Something drastic had to be done. And if you look at my article, I say in the bigger balance of things, the stock exchange had to be shut. And there's one other thing that I think I should bring to the fore. One of the biggest players in that stock exchange is Old Mutual. If you notice, there were political statements that were flying here and there about Old Mutual. Now I need to elucidate on that and maybe explain what was happening behind the scenes with the issue of Old Mutual. It's not like Old Mutual was engaging in illegal activity, but it became a conduit of that activity. I'll explain. Old Mutual is listed in 3 stock exchanges. It's listed in the London Stock Exchange, it's listed in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it's listed in the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. By listed, I mean its trading counters are available in those 3 markets. Now, because this is one entity, the Old Mutual entity, regardless of where it is operating geographically, it's one entity. If you look at its share value on the London Stock Exchange, then you look at its share value on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, you can almost derive its share value on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. And because you can derive its value on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange using the other 2, you could almost always also derive the exchange rate, which was then called the Old Mutual Implied Rate, OMIR, is it? Old Mutual Implied Rate, yes. Now, that's the other evil that was coming out of the stock exchange. The first one, of course, the activities that were there that we referred to, that we alluded to earlier. Then, of course, this OMIR, where people engaged in this activity of whatever activity we discussed, whatever they were doing, for them to come to a figure of the fair value of their loot after checking out from the stock exchange, they would then look at and calculate using the OMIR, Old Mutual Implied Rate, and then come to a figure. And that rate, because it's based on shares and not based on market forces, it gave a false, not the word false, I don't know what word to use, which is not false, but it didn't give the correct exchange rate for the US dollar against the Zimbabwe dollar. It was giving it from a perspective of shares, from a perspective of deals, from a perspective of how do I put it? By the way, because it was the biggest, or still is the biggest counter on that Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, it also meant it attracted the most people wanted rent seeking. People wanted to hide. People wanted to avoid the adverse effects of inflation that was happening all over the economy. Most of them then came bought into this counter. So that means the demand for that counter became high because it was a stable counter on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. But then that demand then translated to mean also the exchange rate, because it will now involve the Old Mutual Implied Rate. Demand for people trying to hide from inflation necessarily meant the rate is going to shoot higher and higher and higher. And because everyone was now trusting it, mind you, it's listed in the reputable London Exchange, reputable Johannesburg Exchange, naturally that meant everyone was more accepting of its rate. And when they shut down, the authorities, I'm sure, they had one eye on this Old Mutual Implied Rate, as well as obviously on the activities. And to show that they had one eye on that, the authorities have now opened the Vic Falls Stock Exchange, which is denominated in the US dollars. It's not in the local currency. And among other companies that have been moved there, I think Old Mutual has been moved there. This is now to give it a US dollar base, because it's on the US dollar platform. You can no longer derive the exchange rate using Old Mutual Implied Rate easily. It's not as easy as that, because you're talking one listed in pounds in London, another listed in rands in South Africa, and in Zimbabwe it's listed in US dollars. So they are trying to curtail this Old Mutual Implied Rate. That's why they had to move it to the Vic Falls Stock Exchange.
Now, so one thing I would need for you to clarify for me is, Old Mutual came under a lot of fire for this, and they really looked villainous. Was it really their fault that they're as big as they are, because of course they're a global company. So is
Definitely
it
not.
really their fault?
Definitely
Was it
not.
so intentional what they were doing, or was this just the consequence of being too big in a very tiny market?
You can't fault them for being big. It's like you're punishing success. They were successful. They are successful, well, which is explained by why they are listed on all those stock exchanges all over the world. They are successful. The point is we have our own issues, and people are rational people. We don't want to splurge money on things that will make me lose value. And if there's a place where I can go and hide my money in such a way that it's not going to lose value, I'm definitely going to be, I'm a rational human being after all. I'm going to gravitate towards that. So Old Mutual became a victim of circumstances in Zimbabwe. I don't want to believe they woke up in the morning and thought, okay, how is the best way that we can take the Zimbabwean system? And in any case, these people are operating within the Zimbabwe. The Old Mutual is operating within the Zimbabwe economy. Old Mutual owns Caps Bank, for instance. So what affects the economy affects their profit margin, and what affects their profit margin affects their value. I don't think they were enjoying the circumstances they stood. They were just a victim of circumstances.
Yeah, and it's crazy, because that's part of the reason why in our economy it's very difficult to listen to our leaders, because they are constantly scapegoating. You know, they will throw anyone and anything under the bus if it's convenient. And the shameful thing is that you then end up being left, you know, confused, because you don't know now whether there's truth in what they're saying or there isn't. Which is why I was saying things like trying to understand the RBZ Forex auction system, if it's working. You don't know whether to then wake up and say, okay, Mtuli, you got something right for once, because tomorrow it turns out that it really wasn't, you know, it wasn't really done with the best intention, etc., etc. I think we've run out of time, Admire, and I don't know if I'm going to be popular for saying this, but yeah, we've certainly run out of time, and I thank you so much for you coming on to help explain things and to make things a little clearer. My last question to you is, look, the Zimbabwean economy is just, yeah, it's a minefield to try and explore and understand. If you were the Minister of Finance, today we made you the Minister of Finance, what would be your very, very quick to explain, step-by-step way of getting us back to the form that we know we should be in?
You've put me in a spot.
Yeah, no.
I'll give you the short answer and the long answer, if that were to happen. The short answer is we need to produce as a nation. Production helps in two ways. First of all, it saves our forex, because at the moment we are currently using every forex that's coming in to import things that we could normally produce as a nation. That's the short answer. We need to produce. The long answer, there is so many things, many political, many assumed. It's difficult to divorce our economy from mindsets. Like you were telling me that once bitten, twice shy, you said that earlier. People need to be convinced. This is our only nation. This is our only economy. We were not going to have another. And we should be invested in its well-being, because in itself, it also assists our own individual well-beings. So we are looking at things like, unfortunately, productivity is also affected globally because of the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic at the moment. But we should be looking at a situation where we improve our productivity, we reduce on corruption. It's been said over and over, because corruption affects the efficient distribution of resources to where they are needed most. Yeah, it's a hard job.
Can you realistically, sorry, I know I said it was the last question, but can you realistically reduce corruption? Corruption happens everywhere in the world, right? There's just a laser beam focus on corruption in the third world, because, you know, they're not that good at hiding it. all right? But corruption happens everywhere in the world. Can you really curtail it? Like, is it rational to expect people who've been corrupt their whole lives to suddenly go cold turkey? How do you curtail corruption, reduce it so that it doesn't happen? You're saying, and you're also talking about public mindset. I'll give you something else to consider while you're thinking about your answer for curtailing corruption. Corruption is so inbred in our country. You said that we are the second largest informal sector after Bolivia.
Olivia, yeah.
That comes with consequences, admire, because in an informal sector, you learn to do things informally. And informally, like Frederick quite rightly said earlier on when we were talking about that, justice makes corruption much easier to take up. So even us ourselves, as Zimbabweans, you're saying we need a mindset that's joined to what the minister would like to achieve. We are shortcutists. That's not a word, but it is today. We're shortcutists. We don't understand consequences. If I get into legal trouble today and I find myself in cuffs, my first mindset is not to say, oh no, I've messed up, now the law is going to get me. My first mindset is, who do I have in my phone who can get me out?
Who do I call? Who's on my list?
You see, whether I'm doing it in business, whether I'm doing it in so corruption is not just a thing that is in our leadership. Yes, it started there and trickled down. So how do you curtail corruption when it literally is the fiber of our being?
I'll look at it this way. I'll refer you back to the adage that I said earlier, where I spoke of success begets more success. By that I mean, we should be serious about it. I mean, the authorities should be serious about it in such a way that where it is found, punishment should be meted. And where punishment is meted, it trickles down to the next person that I can't get away with corruption. And then to the next person, then to the next person. As I put it across, this will have a snowball effect. Where where corruption is found, it should be punished. Where it is found, where there is proof, it should be punished. The second thing is, corruption generally breeds in an environment where there is lack. And ours is such an environment. So to curtail corruption, perhaps there should be efficient allocation of resources. By that, why would you want to pay someone to get a passport? When a passport, that, a human being is a rational human being. If you're told right now, everyone in the country, fairness, is going to get a passport after 6 months, you won't find yourself needing to pay someone to get yours in 2 weeks because everyone is in the queue for 6 months. It's just fairness. If you're told, Kuda, you're going to have to wait in a queue for fuel and no one is jumping that queue and you have to wait for 2 days for fuel, it's painful. It's, well, not in many countries in the world, 2 or 3 others are facing such. But then if you have to wait two days and no one else is coming straight through and going to the pump attendant to give them something today, you will wait, because this is a situation that we have in our country. We can't have a place where some, because they can oil up hands, jump queues for things. So the first thing I spoke of was it should be punished where found. Secondly, there should be fairness. If there's fairness in resource allocation, fairness in everything, it naturally kills corruption. Like I gave you the example of the passport office. If you know you're going to wait 6 months, regardless of if you pay an underhand envelope or if you don't, and me, I apply, I get in 6 months, you get in 6 months as well, then who will be paying for what if I'm going to be waiting for the same as everyone else? It's not to say that the money is there or the passport will come tomorrow. It's still a situation. The passport is still needing foreign currency to buy paper. There's still the same challenges, but there's now fairness. And this fairness is going to kill the corruption, or at least reduce it to a manageable level. As you say, there's no way in the world where there's no corruption.
Your name is appropriate. I certainly admire you and your ability to explain these things. You have gotten the endorsement of my big brother, Tanya, who says, quite frankly, uyungati. So it looks like you're now going to have a residency here on Kudamangwe Live. And we thank you very much for coming through. Definitely, every time we need something explained clear that's happening with the economy, admire your guy. Thank you so much for coming through. Thank you everyone for watching. Frederick, Kudzi, Tanya, Odi, everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much. For your comments are the ones that keep the show going, as well as your views. Please like, share, and everything. I put Maya's article in the comment section. I implore you, please read that, share it, and try and distribute as far and wide as you can, because it helps. And ultimately, guys, the reason why I have taken this platform now in this direction, where I'm no longer just talking by myself, is because it's the people like Admire who help to strengthen our knowledge, our capacity to be able to interpret and navigate Zimbabwe, so that we can be proud of our country. We can understand how to fix our country. And if we should have complaints, which we have many, we know what we're complaining about, not just to say Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe. Admire, thank you so much for coming through.
Pleasure's mine.
And we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. That is a wrap.